Thanks, Andrew. I'm really happy to be here and see some familiar faces. Sorry, I'm just going to get this going. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Continue to share. Um, I've been at NADO for a couple of years now, but I've been doing WealthWorks for a while. I am based in Vermont, and yeah. Anyway, I've been doing WealthWorks for a while since it was originally funded by the Ford Foundation, but in my time at NATO, I've kind of come to think about some of the ways um, that EDDs might be able to use it. So before we get into the SED stuff, I'm just going to do a really quick intro for those of you who may not be familiar with it. This is an approach to economic development that was developed in response to the Ford Foundation wanting to put money on the ground in rural and kind of the most high poverty rural areas. And it's really about connecting a region's assets to market demand. It's about building rooted wealth. And it's about bringing together a wide variety of partners who are all getting what they need out of it, as well as kind of discovering shared or common interests. At its kind of the nth degree, it's about building a sector, but we're not going to talk about that today. But that is kind of another piece of it. And these are the kind of key principles. So creating wealth, broadly defined, and doing no harm to any of the wealth in your region. Rooting wealth in local people, places, and firms through local ownership, control, and influence. And again, it was really developed to build lasting livelihoods by intentionally including people and firms on the social and economic margins. That was why it was developed. So when we talk about wealth, this is what we're talking about. There are 8 forms. There's a lot of information on the NATO website and the WealthWorks website that goes into a lot of detail on these, but this is the basics. Some of these you're probably familiar with and some you might not be. But in my experience, the kind of first 3, intellectual, individual, and social, are kind of the foundational forms of wealth that allow you to build all of the others. So it's really about having the trust and relationships, having the skills, and having kind of the knowledge and creativity to come up with new ideas. And we use these in different ways. One way is just understanding what we have, assessing what we have on the ground. And that's kind of key to how we use it in the SEDS. And also, actually, all of it, the design, the regions can design strategies to either build on these assets or build them to be greater. And then also in measurement, which also comes into play into the SEDS. So I'm curious, and I can't, oh, I guess I can see, I don't know if I can see this chat, but I was going to ask if folks have thoughts about oh, I see it now. If folks have thoughts about kind of the strongest form of wealth in your region, if you all have any thoughts about that. And we can be pretty casual, so if you want to like unmute yourself or you can type in the chat. But like, for instance, I'm in a small town, it's called Heinsberg, Vermont. And I think, and if I think about this, I would think natural, we have a lot of amazing, actually natural and built, because a lot of what we have is trails, which technically are natural, they're in nature, but because they're trails, they're also built by people. And also, I think social capital. So I see somebody saying natural resources. Certainly a lot of our rural areas, that's kind of what we have, right? Natural resources. Anybody else want to weigh in on the strength of kind of their strongest asset? I want, as I think about, I guess the other thing is, in my community, we have a regional high school. So that means that we have some intellectual capital. We have a kind of It's a high school for 5 towns. So um, infrastructure, good. Social and natural. Yes, thank you, Meg. Great. Yes, you get it. Perfect. All right. Intellectual and built. See, yeah. And I'm sure you all have all of these in your places, but sometimes, when we're thinking about building on what we have, we're trying to think about like what do we have the most of? And that's kind of was my wanting to talk about what that is. But anyway, there's lots of resources to do some more thinking about this. So, all right, I'm going to move us forward. So, as I've been at NADO, I've been thinking about like how does wealth creation come into the work of EDDs? And so this is what I've come up with. Obviously, we're going to be talking about today about the CEDS in terms of comprehensive planning and the SWOT and measurement. But there are other ways too. And one of these is this like kind of sector collaboration role where EDDs are really you know, bringing their top sectors, the players in those sectors together to really collaborate for mutual benefit. And that might look like sharing resources or cooperative joint purchasing or things like that, where they're kind of pooling their resources to make the sector work better for everyone. And then finally, this value chain development. The value chain is a key tool of the wealth creation approach, and it's really about mapping and filling gaps in a particular chain around a particular market opportunity. So there are a lot of examples in agriculture, forestry, recreation, tourism, housing, energy, the website, which I'll share at the end. But the wealth creation website at NADO and also the WealthWorks website have a ton of great stories about all of these. So yes, I'm good, but I'm going to move this forward because we are talking about the CEDS. So how do you use wealth creation in the CEDS? And this is another thing that I've really been kind of trying to figure out. And what I've determined is that so far what I've seen is this. So I've seen EDDs use it in terms of not only the process or the content, which is what you would guess, but also the process. Like I've seen folks use it in terms of thinking about what their committee or their CEDS committee looks like and who is a part of it, but also in how they engage people and players in their region. And then in the content, as you might imagine, the asset inventory and the SWOT or the alternative, the SOAR, and evaluation are the key pieces that benefit from taking a wealth creation approach. And I'm going to share some examples of both. There's a piece that I just put out, sort of like a microsite that you can find on the NADO website that has these examples that I'm sharing, but also others that might be helpful if you're interested in going farther on this. So the process. So this is one example. Region 5 Development Commission is in Minnesota, and they've actually built their committee around their interests by WealthWorks Capital. So you can see it right here. They're trying to have a really robust committee that really has strengths in in building different forms of capital. And it's actually really interesting because way back, we used to do an exercise, like a facilitated exercise when we'd have meetings where you had to you'd put on a sticky note on your clothing, like the form of capital that you were best at creating. And then we would have people circulate and find someone that they wanted to learn from about how they actually built that form of capital. And then we'd have some like interactions and everybody was able to be an expert, which was really fun. And so this makes me think of that. I think I put another resource here too, which is how to build the CEDS strategy committee, which is, I'm sure you're already aware of. But I mean, the other way to think about the committee and the process is, who are you engaging beyond your committee? Like, how are you going out into the community or your region to understand what the needs are. So, I mean, just thinking about trying to engage a wide variety of people is just a really important thing. And I'm sure you're already doing that. But yeah, anyway, I wanted to share this because I thought it was really interesting about how they've really thought about their committee in this way. So there's this tool, and all of these tools are on the NADO wealth creation website, by the way, but I wanted to share some of them in case they're at all useful. But this is one that's really about like understanding your current committee members, what their strength is and building different capitals, potential partners you might want to work with that have these strengths, and then the value proposition, which is another kind of key piece about the WealthWorks approach, is really why, what's in it for them. Like we want people to engage with us, and we want to think that it's, they're just giving of themselves, and a lot of times they are, but also we want to make sure that they're, getting it's healthier, I think, if there's a give and take, right? If they're getting something out of it too, whether it's networking or I don't know what it is. But this is, oops, but this is an opportunity to really think about what that might be. So when you make that ask about somebody joining your committee or engaging with you and putting your CEDS together, like why would they be interested in participating in your work, and how might you engage them, knowing what that value proposition is. So this is a worksheet that might be useful as you think about your committees. And then content. As I mentioned earlier, it's really, I think the 8 forms of wealth really provide a nice organizing kind of framework for thinking about the CEDS. And these are some of the ways. So like asset inventory and mapping, considering capitals through the SWOT, and evaluating progress. And I'm going to show you some examples of each. So you've already seen that the CEDS has these sections. And so I'm going to go section by section and talk to you about how a wealth creation approach you could take an approach in that way. So even the summary background, right? This is the summary of the economic conditions and other conditions of the region. What we're asking ourselves in this piece is what have we done and what's going on? And I feel like this is also an opportunity to share that data across a wealth creation, across the 8 forms of wealth. So you're reporting the conditions of the region across the 8 capitals. So the obvious ones that you see all the time are jobs and employment, educational attainment, revenues, income. But if you want to think about the 8 forms of wealth, you could also think about natural capital, cultural capital, intellectual capital. And I think a lot of that is already happening. You just might not call it that, but you're doing it. So again, another tool. This is a very simple asset inventory tool to really kind of methodically think about each of those capitals and what do you have? What do you have in your region that speaks to that capital? And again, this is available too. And then another tool is the spider diagram tool, which is a little bit more, is a bit broader. You're really like rating like when I asked what you felt like your strongest capital was, this is the question you'd be asking here. Like on a scale of 0 to 5, where is that broadly, that capital broadly? And I've used this spider diagram tool in a lot of kind of on-site, regional or community meetings. And it's a really interesting exercise because it unearths kind of perceptions. You might have 10 people doing this exercise from the same place, but they may have different perceptions about the strengths of these different capitals. And so it's really a learning tool to like uncover what those assumptions are and why people have them. But one thing I wanted to share because I thought it was really neat, the new Southeastern Council of Governments is in South Dakota, and they have taken a wealth creation approach to their CEDS, which just came out in the past few months. And they actually did use the spider diagram in those meetings and came out with this really cool graphic that shows, collectively across all of the folks that they engaged, what were they thinking in terms of strengths. So just a really interesting way of showing that information. And again, it's pretty broad, but then you can kind of drill down. Okay, our strongest asset is natural capital. Why? And they did lay that out. They had paragraphs of like what was included in that natural capital category. So anyway, just some interesting ways of utilizing it in the CEDS. The SWOT. I know everybody doesn't use the SWOT, but clearly it's a piece of the CEDS, and I know some are using the SOAR, and I think there's a framework called NOISE. But they generally, you can think about any of those frameworks through the eight capitals. So I'm not going to run through all of this, but strengths are, we just talked about assets, which are strengths. So those are the capitals we actually have and use and can use more of. Whereas the weaknesses are the ones that we're missing or are weak. And opportunities, typically opportunities are those underutilized capitals, right? The underutilized buildings, the underutilized skills, people's skills, all sorts of things. I'm trying to think, underutilized. Yeah, anyway, there's a lot of different kinds of underutilized capital. It's not just buildings and like built capital. And you can see some other things here. Threats are typically, right, policy barriers, other ownership. Another thing that comes up all the time is like vacant buildings owned by absentee landlords, right? That's like this ownership by those outside of the region. That's a threat. So you can see how this plays out, and this just gives a really guidance as to how you might use this. But I've actually seen, and I wanted to share that too, how this looks, how this can look. This is from Acadiana. I know Cade is on the call today, so I'm hoping, Cade, maybe you can share a little bit about how this played out. But you can see that that Acadiana actually went through their SWOT and had strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats for each of those capitals, which I found really interesting. And I think I'm seeing others do that as well. Cade, can I get you to unmute and just talk about kind of what this was like? Oh, well, that's okay. The Acadiana uh, CEDS is a really, I think it was done in the past couple of years, and it's a really great example of how to use wealth creation as a framework for your CEDS, and also that Southeastern COG one in South Dakota. And you'll see both of those linked in this CEDS and wealth creation resource that I've recently put together, so you can see what those look like. And just some other examples. This is just a couple, I think, Buckeye Hills identifies this idea of asset-based development as an opportunity, and they really talk about kind of local ownership and control of assets as a wealth building opportunity. I think this SWOT to the left, I'm pretty sure this may have come from Southeastern COG. It's kind of how they started to think about their SWOT. Anyway, there are way more examples of what this looks like. And oops, sorry. So again, this is coming into the kind of strategic direction and action plan section of the CEDS. I'm seeing EDDs using that wealth creation here too, which is kind of different. So you can see in the Southeastern COG, they have these three key goals: facilitating responsible community planning and development, promoting and diversifying workforce and business development, and fostering community vibrancy and resiliency. And under each of those goals, there are multiple strategies, each of which notes the key partners, the capitals affected, and the measures, which I just love this, like really thinking about, each strategy, which capitals it's really having an impact on, and presumably measuring, the impact it is having on those capitals. And if you take an approach like this, you can really look across your strategies to really see, are we having an impact on all the capitals? You know, are our strategies diverse enough to have those kinds of impacts? I think that, yeah, another one, Acadiana, again, also did this in their strategy, is they actually had strategies, they actually had a goal for each capital. So you'll see 8 of these goals. And in this case, I just put this one in here. It's individual capital. So they really wanted to improve individuals' physical and mental well-being, to increase economic opportunity for Acadiana's workforce, and really built out their strategies to impact each of those capitals, which yeah, when I saw this, I was really excited because it makes perfect sense to me. And it may not work for everybody, but I think it's a really interesting. Yes, Cade, you're there. Would you unmute and just speak for a few minutes about this? I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but
That's okay. Thank you, Melissa.
yeah.
Yeah, so we were introduced to the WealthWorks model years ago when we were doing some opportunity zone planning back in 2019 and
Mm,
2020. Um, and we loved the methodology so much that we decided to keep it and use it throughout a lot of our planning activities, including the redevelopment of our CEDS. And we started with it from the beginning of the process, which really helped because when we did our stakeholder engagement meetings, we went category by category of the capitals and we talked about them in that way. And that gave us direct results that were able to inform the goals and objectives that we included in our SEDS. And it the way it works with the SWOT analysis really helps because we went through each capital and did almost like a mini SWOT analysis
mhm,
of those individual, well, I shouldn't say individual because that is a capital of each
mhm.
capital. Um, and doing it that way really helped to organize all of this information into something that we could put in a deliverable.
That's great. That's great to hear. Thank you, Kate. I really appreciate you stepping in and just explaining. I mean, the other thing I love about the thing where it started, or at least where I saw it start with Acadiana, was these amazing prospectuses for kind of economic development, and they really we're organized by capital of like, what do we have that you should care about? And it's just, I didn't share that here because we're talking about the SEDS, but I think it's a really powerful framing for thinking about creating a regional prospectus too, um, in terms of not only attracting outside businesses to come in, but also in terms of homegrown entrepreneurial, activity in your region, if you can really say, look at all the amazing things that we have. So yeah, thank you, Cade. I
Thank
appreciate
you,
that.
Melissa.
Yeah. Um, Yeah, and just this is just another example that I really like. Region 5 Development Commission has been engaged in WealthWorks for a long time. They're a regional hub in Minnesota that really does all their work using this lens. And I love this quote because it's really the question that she mentions here, who else cares about this? Um, is really, it's part of engaging new partners, and it really gets into that concept of value propositions, but it also helps to really develop those goals and strategies. And finding partners too. I mean, I mentioned it in terms of the committee, but I think as you think about strategies, and the partners that you need to engage to actually move those strategies forward, it's really important to really ask that question. Like, who else cares about this and why do they care? Like, what's in it for them and what kinds of capitals do they care about? So yes. Um, and I also like, just in terms of strategies, another place that I've seen um, wealth creation, the CEDS, is this concept of local ownership, right? We want to keep wealth local. That's one of our principles. So what does that look like? Um, what it looks like is, you know, buy local campaigns, regional branding, cooperatives, resident-owned communities. I mean, there's so many things. And I actually just put out a resource about what local ownership looks like, what kinds of structures of local ownership and control there are, and how you might engage with them. So look for that too. But you can see I just put in some examples of what this looks like. It looks like a regional local ownership entrepreneurial community, or it looks like this idea of employee stock ownership plans and different kinds of business models that keep that wealth local and keep those businesses local. Um, and evaluation, that's the last piece. This is taken from the EDA guidelines. The ideas, I think the way EDA has engaged in wealth creation in their CEDS framework is really through evaluation. And I would argue and I have just argued that it belongs in all of the pieces of the sets, but this is where it started. It started with the evaluation as a way of thinking about like the outcomes as more than just jobs and income. There are other outcomes. And so you can really use these 8 capitals as a way to think about those outcomes. Um, so there's a link there to the evaluation framework, but it's really about how do we measure those broader outcomes that lead to resiliency and sustainability. And just some examples, like EDDs are doing this. They are kind of using these 8 capitals in their evaluation frameworks, and really thinking about how to do that through those 8 capitals. So this is another tool that I use to support people in thinking about how to measure success across the forms of capital. So you can see it starts with the strategy. So for instance, what's the strategy in your CEDS that you're going to take, and what capitals is it really affecting? And that's where, thinking about strategies in that way might help. What's the change you're seeking? That's typically the indicator. And I know that's kind of jargony, but I do a lot of measurement work. And how would you measure that change? And that a measure typically has a unit of measurement. And what's the baseline? The baseline is typically the first time you measure it, or if you have historical data, you can go as far back as you have data. But you need a baseline in order to actually show that you're making progress. Typically, we think about a target. I don't know, in some CEDS I see targets and others I don't. How will you measure it, and how are you going to use the data? Again, I usually recommend not measuring things unless you're going to have a way of using it, not just measuring things for the sake of measuring, because measurement takes time. And then in terms of partners, like, are there any partners that would be useful in terms of either finding that data, collecting it, like um, publishing it, publicizing it. Um, Partnerships, I feel like, are key to all of this work. So naming them is really important. Anyway, this is the tool that I typically use when I'm thinking about measurement, and it does go across for all those. I'm just showing you a piece of it. It clearly talks about all the forms of wealth. And also, local ownership and control. And yes, so yes, a wealth creation approach that says is noted as a best practice by EDA, offers an asset-based approach to economic development, provides a vocabulary, hopefully, that is not too jargony to engage stakeholders about regional issues, and can complement traditional metrics. I'm not suggesting that you'd stop measuring job creation and those because clearly they're required. I'm just suggesting that you might expand your metrics to show a broader picture of economic development in your place. I do think it's fun. You'll have to report back to me on if that's the case for you. And yeah, I just had some more information about like how EDDs actually incorporate this. This is just kind of, we've already talked about this. Just kind of a summary, leveraging local assets, encouraging local and regional entrepreneurship, capital access, and measuring beyond jobs. And just a couple of, I just wanted to show you what this might look like in terms of, we already talked about the SWOT and measurement. This is a little bit more about how this might look in different sets. In terms of livelihoods, you can see here ensuring local residents can access high quality jobs. That's livelihoods. We've got value chains, local entrepreneurship, local ownership of businesses and infrastructure, retaining wealth. So I just wanted to share a couple of really interesting examples of how even though people might not be thinking wealth creation, it's there. Like you're probably already doing this and you probably already have these kinds of strategies in your own, but yes. And just some quick resources. The WealthWorks website is still the kind of most comprehensive resource. There are great modules, learning modules on here. There's great videos, like short videos that are really engaging. There's tools and stories about how it's been used on the ground. And then this NADO wealth creation website is kind of what I've been working on, is how do EDDs engage with wealth creation. So there's some reports on there, there's some blog posts and training. All the worksheets that I've shared with you on this are on that site. And yeah, continue to have webinars, and next spring will be the next Wealth Creation Summit, which I'm starting to think about right now. And these are the WealthWorks regional hubs. So these organizations in their place are kind of the experts on wealth creation. You'll see there's some holes in this map, but because I'm doing, working at NADO and doing wealth creation, I can fill as many of those holes as need to be filled. But, and yes, this is me in the corner too. This is when I'm not working at NADO, I'm doing consulting through Community Roots, and I am the hub for the Northeast because that's where I live. So, that's it. That's what I've got for you today, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Or any, if you're thinking about taking a wealth creation approach to your CEDS, I'm always happy to chat too. And I have spoken with folks that are doing a little, desktop coaching on what this might look like and how you might approach it. So, yeah. Anyway, I'm gonna kind of stop talking and see if anybody has questions or wants to share their own approach to kind of how you've done this or taken this kind of an approach to your CEDS or where you are?